Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. When he thought about how impressive and glorious it would be to become a major general, his excitement began to build. With that, he hurried out into the command center, where Zhao Long and the others clasped hands in salute. Waving his hand in grand fashion, he tried to sound as heroic as possible as he said, "Come, my brothers. Join me at the pagoda to witness my promotion to Major General." Zhao Long's eyes went wide, but he quickly began to send messages to call everyone together. Before long, all 1,000 members of Bai Xiaochun's regiment were notified, and were hurrying over. "Brothers," he said loudly, "once I become a Major General, we'll have more meat to eat and more alcohol to drink." Then he flew into the air toward the pagoda. All the cultivators in the regiment were very excited, and none of them questioned Bai Xiaochun's words at all. If he said that he was going to become a major general, then they had complete confidence that he would do just that. It made quite a grand sight as the entire group clustered around him and flew toward the pagoda. The sight of more than 1,000 beams of light shooting through Great Wall City captured the attention of quite a few other cultivators. However, many soldiers had looks of derision on their faces. After all, the sight of Bai Xiaochun parading through the city wasn't anything new. The only surprising thing was how long it had been since they last saw him it. Most of them gave him little more than a single glance. Before long, Bai Xiaochun and his men were outside of the pagoda, where quite a few other cultivators were gathered to either purchase items or turn in souls. The arrival of Bai Xiaochun and his men didn't cause too much of a stir, and most people just continued on with whatever business they had at hand. Ignoring them, Bai Xiaochun walked up to the pagoda, took a deep breath, and then flew up into the air, just as he had seen the top chosen do in the past when they handed in vengeful souls. There, he waved his sleeve, producing a soul sphere which he subsequently crushed. A boom could be heard as souls poured out from the crushed soul sphere. The sight of so many souls attracted a bit of envy from some of the cultivators present, although most of them weren't paying much attention. "Oh, it's Bai Xiaochun." As soon as the 10,000 vengeful souls appeared, the giant eye atop the pagoda absorbed them. Feeling quite pleased with himself, Bai Xiaochun patted his bag of holding to produce another soul sphere. After crushing it, another 10,000 souls appeared, which the eye absorbed. Then he produced a third sphere, causing quite a few curious eyes to look up at him from below. Just when he was about to crush the third soul sphere, a blood-colored beam of light appeared off in the distance, which caused a murderous aura to fill the entire area. That's Ji Feng, Colonel Ji Feng. Back before Bai Xiaochun rose to prominence, he was considered the core formation cultivator most likely to become a major general. I wonder which of the two of them will actually succeed? As the crowd buzzed, the beam of light faded away, revealing a young man with long hair, clad in a suit of blood-colored armor. That young man was none other than Ji Feng. He hovered to a stop in midair on the other side of the huge pagoda, making it possible for him to look Bai Xiaochun right in the eye. When he did, an expression of scorn appeared on his face. "Trifling apothecary," he thought. "Other than a nice cultivation base, what do you have? I, Ji Feng, have too much battle credit to count. What makes you think you deserve to compare yourself to me?" Not only did Ji Feng despise Bai Xiaochun, he despised his soul convergence pills as well. As far as he was concerned, Bai Xiaochun was nothing more than an apothecary who had used some fancy tricks to get into a good position, and didn't compare to him at all. He actually hadn't planned to hand in any souls today, but after seeing Bai Xiaochun show up, he decided to come put him in his place. Bai Xiaochun recognized Ji Feng. Technically speaking, this was their second time encountering each other. The first time had been back when he first got to the Great Wall, and had come to check how much battle credit he had to spend to get certain items. At that time, Ji Feng had handed in 10,000 souls to the pagoda and caused quite a stir. Of course, that was before the advent of soul convergence pills, when getting 10,000 souls together in one place had been quite an accomplishment. When Bai Xiaochun saw the scorn in Ji Feng's eyes, he was actually a bit surprised. "I never did anything to offend you, did I?" he thought. But after thinking about it for a moment, he realized what was going on, and glared at Ji Feng. Ji Feng looked back at him coldly, and soon, it became obvious that they were having a bit of a showdown. When the cultivators down below saw what was happening, their spirits were roused, and they began to pay close attention. "They're having a standoff. I'm more of a fan of Colonel Ji Feng. He got his battle credit from climbing mountains of corpses and swimming through seas of blood. Didn't Colonel Bai Xiaochun do the same thing though? Forget about the soul convergence pill for a moment. Do you know how many people he saved in that battle? As people talked about the matter, and even placed some bets, Ji Feng chuckled coldly and then waved his arm, sending a collection of 100,000 vengeful souls streaming out of his bag of holding. Although the souls were somewhat listless and faded, as soon as they appeared in the open, the huge eye quickly absorbed them. 100,000 souls. Colonel Ji Feng definitely deserves his reputation as a top chosen in the 5 legions. He doesn't even use soul convergence pills, but still managed to collect 100,000 souls. After tossing out the 100,000 souls, Ji Feng looked over coldly at Bai Xiaochun, and from the look in his eye, his message was clear. You have souls, right? Well, let's have a little contest and see who has the most. A smile immediately broke out on Bai Xiaochun's face. Now that he thought about it, handing over souls all by himself was actually pretty boring. But who would have thought that Ji Feng would suddenly show up and want to have a contest? The truth was that Bai Xiaochun loved crushing opponents in this way. Sighing, he waved his hand to send 20 soul spheres flying out. A boom rang out as the soul spheres collapsed, sending out a vast cloud of 200,000 souls. Almost as soon as the shocking sight appeared, the huge eye atop the pagoda began to shine brightly and quickly absorbed them. Then, Bai Xiaochun looked over at Ji Feng with an expression of open provocation. Ji Feng's expression turned grim, and he chuckled in disdain. Waving his hand, he sent tens of thousands of souls flying out of his bag of holding. However, he didn't stop there. Having emptied one bag of holding, he pulled out another, opened it, and sent an additional group of tens of thousands of souls out to be absorbed by the huge eye. This scene immediately provoked exclamations of shock from the surrounding cultivators. Heavens! Just how many vengeful souls does Colonel Ji Feng have? How did he possibly get so many souls? Everyone else was shocked, but Bai Xiaochun was actually feeling a bit impatient. Alright, how many souls do you have? He said loudly. Just spit out the number. Sitting around while you open up a bunch of bags of holding is too boring. How about this? You say a number, and if I can't produce that many souls, then I'll admit defeat. The arrogant tone with which he spoke immediately caused the entire area to go quiet. Think you're really tough stuff, don't you? Ji Feng replied. Well, since you're asking to be humiliated, then I'll oblige. Then his hands blurred as he sent one bag of holding after another flying out, until there were 9 of them. Feast your eyes upon 2,700,000 vengeful souls. Although Ji Feng's words were spoken with coolness and calm, it was impossible to conceal the arrogance which existed deep in his bones. Complete and utter silence met Ji Feng's words and actions. A few breaths of time passed, and then, with the exception of Bai Xiaochun's subordinates, everyone devolved into a huge commotion. 2,700,000? Heavens, I can't believe that the exalted Colonel Ji Feng can produce so many souls. That's as many souls as you'll see in a small-scale battle outside the Great Wall. In addition to crying out in surprise, many cultivators began to send messages to their friends, telling them to hurry over to watch the scene playing out. Hurry up, Colonel Ji Feng is handing in 2,700,000 vengeful souls. This kind of thing has never happened before, it's incredible, get over to the pagoda. Meanwhile, Ji Feng was looking over at Bai Xiaochun with feigned indifference, a faint smile on his face that reflected his confidence in having secured a victory. I don't have that many souls, he said, only about 2 million. What about you, Bai Xiaochun? Sticking his chin up, Bai Xiaochun said, you're right, that isn't very many. Only 2 million? A drop in the bucket. Bai Xiaochun felt like he was a top martial arts master fighting a little kid. It was actually a wonderful feeling. Chuckling, he waved his hand. 300 soul spheres flew out. But things didn't stop there. Next came another 300, and then 400. That was a total of 1,000 soul spheres, all floating there for everyone to see. The sight of 1,000 soul spheres flying out into the open caused jaws to drop everywhere. Ji Feng was so shocked that he wasn't even sure he could believe what he was seeing. Everything was deathly quiet in the area surrounding the pagoda. As for the cultivators who were currently in the middle of flying over to the pagoda, when they got close and saw 1,000 soul spheres, their eyes went wide. 1,000? Heavens! Don't tell me he actually has 10 million vengeful souls? How is that even possible? There's no way that each of those soul spheres has 10,000 vengeful souls in it. Is there? Everyone was reeling in shock, and Ji Feng was struggling with an intense feeling of unease. Although it was impossible to tell exactly how many souls were inside each of the 1,000 soul spheres, he couldn't help but get very nervous. Just when he was about to open his mouth to say something, though, Bai Xiaochun, who apparently didn't feel he had dominated the situation enough, licked his lips and said, using 1,000 soul spheres to crush your 2 million souls is a bit boring. Check this out. Every time he encountered a situation like this to totally show off, he got very excited. Clearing his throat loudly, he waved his hand in a circle, causing another 1,000 soul spheres to fly out. However, things weren't over yet. Another 1,000 appeared, then another, and another. In the blink of an eye, a total of 10,000 soul spheres were floating around. Everyone present felt their minds reeling as they gasped in astonishment. As they stared, they mentally calculated how many souls that could represent, and were filled with even more incredulity than before. In fact, many of them couldn't even believe that their own calculations were correct. No way, 10,000? Okay, theoretically it's possible. Maybe each of the soul spheres only has a few souls in it. Even as everyone waited in nervous uncertainty, Ji Feng lost his ability to keep his mouth shut. You think you can pull a fast one, Bai Xiaochun? He said loudly. I refuse to believe that you have 10,000 souls sealed inside each of those soul spheres. What a joke, 10,000 soul spheres with 10,000 souls each? Do you really think that someone like you can collect more than 100 million souls? Considering how bloodshot Ji Feng's eyes were, it was clear that he definitely didn't believe Bai Xiaochun had 100 million souls. After all, a group of souls that large would only be seen in large-scale battles. Furthermore, if they were all released at once, they would most certainly blot out the sky and cause the lands to quake violently. Don't believe it? Well, why don't you just take a look? Lifting his chin slightly, Bai Xiaochun performed an incantation gesture with his right hand and then waved his finger at the soul spheres. Open, boom. 10,000 soul spheres exploded, and in the blink of an eye, souls immediately began to spill out, filling the entire 30,000-meter area, and then rapidly expanding to fill a 300,000-meter area. And yet, things weren't over yet. Within a single breath of time, that area stretched to 3 million meters. Of course, Bai Xiaochun was doing that on purpose. If he had wished, he could have prevented such a dramatic display. But right now, the entire 3 million meter area around him was filled with vengeful souls. That area far surpassed the limits of Great Wall City, and ensured that the entire city was now cast into darkness. Heaven shook and the earth quaked, causing countless cultivators of the 5 legions in the city to look up in shock. Are the wildlands attacking? Did the spell formation get destroyed? What's happening? As countless exclamations of shock rose up, the cultivators near the pagoda were trembling mutely, as if their minds had been reduced to complete blanks. Even the generals of the 5 legions were shaken. Bai Lin flew out into the open and looked up in astonishment at the sky, as did the other generals. How many souls is that? Numerous beams of light were flying through the air toward the pagoda as almost all of the cultivators of the 5 legions struggled with each other to be able to witness what was happening. The commotion caused Chen Hichan to emerge from the pagoda, whereupon he looked around in disbelief. At that point, the huge eye atop the pagoda began to shine with unprecedentedly bright light, a light that seemed excited. It was almost as if the eye itself possessed a spirit, and that spirit were jubilant. A gravitational force sprang out, causing winds to scream as a vortex formed. Soon, the shocking sea of souls began to slowly shrink down as it was absorbed, the process of which took a full hour. As the light bathed Bai Xiaochun, he felt satisfied to an indescribable degree. And of course, his battle credit skyrocketed. As the sea of souls faded away, Bai Xiaochun hovered there in midair, his chin stuck up, his expression tranquil, but his heart leaping with excitement. In fact, he had to repeatedly remind himself that in this moment, he needed to keep his cool. The cultivators in the area were stupefied, and were looking at Bai Xiaochun both as if he were a god, and also as if he were some sort of freak of nature. Ji Feng was trembling as violently, as if Bai Xiaochun had struck him physically. His entire world suddenly seemed to have been turned upside down, his mind rendered a complete blank. Clearly, this was an event which he would never be able to forget for the rest of his life. People began to look over at Ji Feng with expressions of sympathy. The blow which had just been delivered to him was a vicious one. His opponent had used 100 million souls to crush his paltry 2 million. Even Bai Lin and the other generals were looking at him with sympathy, as was three-eyed Chen Hichan. In that moment of extreme pride, Bai Xiaochun cleared his throat loudly and said, "Everybody back up a bit. The next set is even larger." Before anyone could react, the huge eye atop the pagoda sent out blinding beams of light that almost seemed to be pandering to Bai Xiaochun as they created incredible pressure that pushed all of the surrounding cultivators away. Not even Bai Lin and the other generals were exempt. Soon, the only person standing nearby was Chen Hichan, who was staring with wide-eyed shock at what was happening. He had never seen the true spirit inside of the eye do anything remotely like this. It was almost as if it were following orders from Bai Xiaochun. Beads of sweat popped out on his forehead as he muttered, this. That was when Bai Xiaochun slapped his bag of holding, causing numerous soul spheres to pour out of it. 1,000, 3,000, 5,000. In the blink of an eye, another 10,000 soul spheres had appeared. Even as gasps began to ring out, more soul spheres flew out. 15,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. Every single cultivator in the entire city was shaken to the ultimate degree. Finally, when the number of soul spheres reached 60,000, the people erupted into a thunderous hubbub. Impossible. Did this Bai Xiaochun tap into the underworld river or something? So many souls. Heavens. Are they really souls? Unheard of. This is completely unheard of. Bai Lin and the other generals were dumbstruck, and Chen Hichan was completely flabbergasted and incapable of even reacting. However, most elated of all was the huge eye. It seemed openly excited, as though it were trembling in joy. Soon, more than 80,000 soul spheres were visible, and the excitement of the huge eye began to affect the Great Wall's spell formation. The spell formation shield was rippling and distorting, the sight of which cast shock into the hearts of the onlookers. Outside in the wildlands, people could see the distortions on the spell formation shield, and although they weren't sure what was happening, they could tell that something momentous was occurring. Curious, Mistress Red Dust finally sent some divine sense out toward the Great Wall to see what was going on. It was at that point that 90,000 soul spheres were out in the open. Then the huge eye emitted a scream of frenzied delight that caused everything in heaven and earth to tremble. The sound of it caused Mistress Red Dust's divine sense to instantly shatter. Back in her tent in the wildlands, her eyes snapped open, and she coughed up a massive mouthful of blood. Impossible, she exclaimed. I can understand why the true spirit in that eye is willing to protect the Great Wall, considering it made an agreement with the Celestial. But why would it go so far as to use true spirit resonance to wound me and force me away? When Mistress Red Dust's divine sense was shattered, Chen Hichan detected it. First, he looked out at the wildlands, then he looked down at the huge eye, his expression that of amazement. Obviously, he had also detected the true spirit resonance. A true spirit could call upon the quintessence of its voice to unleash a true spirit resonance, but would usually only do so in extremely dire circumstances. It was quite draining on the true spirit, but was incredibly powerful, so much so that even a diva would be forced to go all out to defend against it. Although the true spirit resonance from moments ago had not been fully powered, it had been enough to destroy Mistress Red Dust's divine sense, and would definitely have been very draining to the true spirit. The true spirit and its pagoda were closely connected to the Starry Sky Dao polarity sect, and in fact, only a few people knew the true origin of the true spirit, one of those people being Chen Hichan. The truth was that it came from Heavenspan Island in the Heavenspan Sea. To the river source sects on the 4 branches of the Heavenspan River, Heavenspan Island was like a supreme entity. In the mortal world, emperors were often supported by noble ministers, and the relationship between the 4 river source sects and Heavenspan Island was much the same. The sects were the nobility, and Heavenspan Island was the imperial palace. Heavenspan Island was also the home of the Celestial. Naturally, he was the ruler of the lands of Heavenspan. And now, the true spirit who had been convinced by Heavenspan Island to guard the Great Wall had suddenly acted in this way. As a result, Chen Hichan couldn't help but look with glittering eyes at the more than 90,000 soul spheres, and Bai Xiaochun. It's protecting its food. Mistress Red Dust was just unlucky to send her divine sense over right in this moment. As for this Bai Xiaochun, how did he get his hands on so many vengeful souls? He's certainly full of secrets. Over the years, Chen Hichan had secretly been paying close attention to Bai Xiaochun. Whether it was his soul convergence pills or his exploding pill furnaces, he had watched over everything carefully. He had even sent some soul convergence pills back to the sect for them to analyze. Of course, he had done all of these things very carefully. He knew that running investigations into members of the 5 legions was a sensitive task. Even as Chen Hichan pondered these things, Bai Xiaochun grandly swished his sleeve. "Open up," he roared. Instantly, all of the 90,000 soul spheres vibrated before bursting open. Clouds of souls immediately poured out, filling the entire city and then pouring out beyond it. 30,000 meters, 300,000 meters, 3 million meters, 30 million meters. In the blink of an eye, the cloud of souls spread out to cover all creation. It was such a shocking event that it wasn't just the cultivators of the 5 legions in Great Wall City who were astonished. Even people in World City noticed what was happening, and their expressions flickered in surprise. It was the same in the wildlands, where the savages and soul cultivators were completely flabbergasted. What's going on? Heavens! What What is that? As the cloud of souls spread out, shocking everyone in the area, the eye atop the tower began to tremble as if in excitement. Then, bright rays of light erupted from the eye, almost as if the true spirit felt that the previous absorption method was too slow, and that it needed to come out into the open. The shining light rapidly converged down into a single point, which then flew out of the eye and transformed into a bat. It was partially translucent, with bright red eyes, and after it came out into the open, it threw its head back and roared, causing an enormous, shadowy figure to appear in the sky above it. That shadowy figure was also a bat, so big it filled the entire sky. As soon as it appeared, it took in a deep breath which caused heaven and earth to tremble as the cloud of souls began to move. They almost looked like tide waters as they moved inexorably toward the enormous bat. The ordinary cultivators of the 5 legions were trembling in shock. Never before had anyone been privy to the fact that there was a bat inside of the huge eye. Although Bai Lin and the other 4 generals had been aware of it, they had never personally seen it, and therefore, all of them were also gasping in astonishment. Heaven and earth distorted as the massive cloud of souls was absorbed by the gigantic bat. The process took approximately 2 hours, after which the enormous shadowy bat looked around with cold but contented eyes. A moment later, it ignored everything else around and allowed its gaze to focus on Bai Xiaochun. Within that gaze was approval, and also a sort of newly acquired closeness. A moment later, the image of the bat transformed back into a dot of light that returned to the huge eye. Bai Xiaochun was a bit taken aback by everything that had occurred, having never imagined the act of turning in a few souls would result in such a scene. Now, he hovered there, heart racing amidst the quiet as all gazes shifted from the huge eye to him. He blinked a few times, mind racing as he tried to come up with an explanation. Meanwhile, his identity medallion in his bag of holding began to vibrate with unprecedented intensity. Startled, Bai Xiaochun pulled out the medallion and scanned it, whereupon his eyes went wide. So many. The battle credits in his identity medallion were currently skyrocketing. Within moments, it passed the point necessary to receive a promotion to Major General, and still kept going. Soon, he had enough for 2 such promotions. Only then did the total begin to slow. The staggering number of battle credits was such that Bai Xiaochun's eyes nearly popped out of his skull. His heart began to beat rapidly, and although he wasn't actually sure exactly what he could get with so much battle credit, he was sure that it was definitely enough to become a major general. Clearly, the true spirit in the huge eye was very pleased with him. Bai Xiaochun looked excitedly at his battle credit, and forgot any plans of trying to explain the situation. Holding his identity medallion high above his head, he shouted, "I want a promotion to Major General." The surrounding cultivators were stunned. What did he just say? Major General, Bai Xiaochun wants a promotion to Major General? This is astonishing. Whether it was the cloud of souls, or the actions of the eye, or his request for a promotion, all of this. Heavens! Bai Xiaochun is definitely going to become a legend. He's actually handing in souls to become a Major General? In almost the same moment that the words left his mouth, the battle credit in his identity medallion was reduced by roughly half. Then, blinding light shone out from the medallion, as Bai Xiaochun's rank as listed inside was altered. Before, he was a colonel, but now he was a major general. However, attached to the title was another word, acting. After all, the rank of major general was a very important one, and was essentially the highest rank any ordinary cultivator could achieve within the 5 legions. The 5 generals and the Diva Patriarch all had to ratify the decision and submit it to the True Spirit, whereupon a report would be sent to the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect. Another factor to consider was that there were currently no open slots for major generals within the 5 legions. If a new major general were to be promoted, one of the previous major generals would have to be transferred away. It was a complicated process that required numerous formalities. Therefore, when Bai Xiaochun spoke the words out loud, and the crowd began to clamor in response, Chen Hichan, Bai Lin, and the other generals immediately felt headaches coming on. Sighing, Chen Hichan transmitted his thoughts to Bai Lin and the generals. "Well, what do you all think? How do we handle the situation?" However, none of them had any idea what to do. This sudden turn of events had been completely unexpected. If Bai Xiaochun had used some other means to rise through the ranks, they might not have needed to consider the matter. However, his actions had caught them completely unprepared. Not even Bai Lin, who had actually attempted to stoke Bai Xiaochun's ambitions in the first place, could ever have imagined that he would actually become a major general so quickly. Much of their shock stemmed from the fact that from the moment the Great Wall had been built until now, Bai Xiaochun was the first person to ever hand in enough souls to be directly promoted to Major General. Seeing that nobody else was saying anything, Bai Lin braced himself and said, "Well, I think Bai Xiaochun clearly has the skills necessary. I don't see any problem. This is not children's game." Chen Hichan replied angrily. The rank of Major General was far too important to be taken lightly. However, there was no way to deny that Bai Xiaochun had earned it. Refusing to acknowledge the legitimacy of the promotion would be preposterous. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun was not very happy. Unaware that Chen Hichan and the generals needed to approve the promotion, he couldn't help but feel a bit irritated that he was listed as only an acting major general. "Senior Bat, this isn't very sincere of you," he said loudly. "I gave you a whole bunch of souls. I mean, there were more than 1 billion. And you only made me an acting major general?" Not willing to give up so easily, he raised his voice and continued, "If you act like this, then why should I turn in more souls later? And what about all the other fellow Taoists here? Why should they turn in souls if they can't trust that they'll be rewarded properly?" The huge eye glittered as if in thought. After a few breaths worth of time passed, and even before Chen Hichan and the others could finish discussing the matter, a message appeared within the identity medallions of all cultivators of the 5 legions. Bai Xiaochun has been promoted to the rank of Major General. The true spirit had gone over the heads of Chen Hichan and the generals to directly report the matter to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. Major General? As news spread back in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, people were initially taken aback, and then quickly sank into astonishment. Big Fatty Zhang had long since succeeded at forming his will core and had been taken in as an apprentice by the Hallmaster of the Hall of Devil Slayers. He was in the middle of a session of cultivation when the news came in, and was immediately enthused. "Good job, Xiaochun." Meanwhile, back at the Great Wall, the 5 legions were in an uproar. Earlier, they had heard Bai Xiaochun's request, but hadn't seen any confirmation that the promotion had been granted. But then, moments later, the message was sent out indicating that Bai Xiaochun had indeed become a major general. Bai Xiaochun was beside himself with joy as he looked at his identity medallion, and the word, acting, vanished from in front of his rank of Major General. Very pleased with himself, he laughed loudly and said, "From this day on, Bai Xiaochun is a Major General." Chen Hichan, Bai Lin, and all the other generals were shocked. After exchanging glances, a strange expression appeared on Bai Lin's face, and Chen Hichan looked up wryly at the true spirit in the huge eye. Clearly, the promotion was the true spirit's way of thanking Bai Xiaochun. After all, a huge amount of vengeful soul like that would be unprecedentedly useful to the true spirit. In the end, Chen Hichan sighed and decided not to worry about the matter any more than necessary. "Bai Lin," he said, "considering that Bai Xiaochun is a skinflayer, why don't you arrange for one of your current major generals to retire?" Then, he departed, shaking his head the entire way. 7 days sped by in a blur. The entire time, Great Wall City was filled with talk of Bai Xiaochun handing in souls, and his promotion to Major General. In fact, such stories would continue to persist for much longer than 7 days. Although countless cultivators were envious of what had happened, it also sparked hope in their hearts. Suddenly, they felt much more anticipation for the possibilities their own futures held. Bai Xiaochun was extremely famous by this point. Although his name wasn't necessarily known among everyone in the 3 major cities within the Great Wall region, everyone in a position of power had heard of him. Something else happened during the 7 days which passed. The Major General of the 3rd Corps, of which Bai Xiaochun's regiment was a part, was convinced by Bai Lin to return to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. That Major General wasn't angry with Bai Xiaochun, but rather, quite grateful. He had been serving at the Great Wall for far many years, and upon returning to the sect, would become an elder in the Hall of Steel Veins. He would also be generously compensated by the sect for all the battle credit he had accumulated. Although he would miss the Great Wall in some ways, going back to the sect was actually the best option for him. Normally speaking, major generals were such important people that they couldn't just leave the Great Wall whenever they wished. In fact, the other major generals were actually a bit envious. Before leaving, he visited Bai Xiaochun to both express his thanks and also transfer his personal staff over for Bai Xiaochun to make use of. Bai Xiaochun was quite moved at the man's sincerity, and guaranteed over and over again that he would treat the staff extremely fairly. A few days after the old man left the Great Wall, Bai Xiaochun's official commission was handed down. He was now the Major General of the 3rd Corps of the Skin Flayers. The day the commission came down, Bai Xiaochun was trembling with excitement, and looked as proud as a rooster as he put on his intimidating, glittering Major General's armor. The suit of armor had a built-in spell formation that, upon activation, instantly caused his entire person to blur and distort, as if intense, shocking energy were building up. His hair even flew around him wildly for a moment before his features became clear again. With that, he pulled out his copper mirror to examine himself. After preening for a long moment, he chuckled and said, "What do you say, little magic mirror? How'd I look?" Imposter Nightcrypt's soul appeared within the mirror, holding back a sigh as he put a shocked expression onto his face. Of course, Bai Xiaochun was elated by his response. After a long moment passed, Imposter Nightcrypt seemed to recover from his shock, and then began to praise Bai Xiaochun in very exaggerated fashion. "Heavens! Sir, are you really the imposing, handsome, carefree, and consummate chosen Bai Xiaochun?" "Impossible. The exalted Bai Xiaochun, who in my heart is a figure who shines more brightly than the sun itself, is clearly a colonel." Although Bai Xiaochun was very pleased by this, he hid his smile behind a blank face and said, "All right, enough with the flattery. Do you really think Bai Xiaochun the kind of person who likes to be brown-nosed? I wanted your opinion on whether or not the armor fits properly." Imposter Nightcrypt rolled his eyes inwardly, well aware that if he did as Bai Xiaochun had actually asked, and stopped flattering him, then Bai Xiaochun would punish him. "I don't like brown-nosing either," Imposter Nightcrypt said. "Nobody in this world does." Inwardly, he was filled with disdain, but didn't show that. Instead, he continued to flatter Bai Xiaochun for the time it takes an incense stick to burn before actually getting around to answering the initial question. "That armor was made specifically for you, wasn't it? It fits perfectly. Although, I do have to say that the reason it looks so intimidating isn't because of the armor itself, but because of how you wear it." Hearing Imposter Nightcrypt's boot-licking was one of Bai Xiaochun's favorite pastimes, and he truly admired his way with words. Finally, he cleared his throat, tossed some medicinal pills into the copper mirror, and then somberly walked out of his residence. Outside, the 10,000 cultivators of the Third Corps were all standing at attention. As soon as Bai Xiaochun appeared, Zhao Long stepped forward and shouted, "Third Corps, hand salute." As soon as the words left Zhao Long's mouth, the 10,000 cultivators clasped hands and bowed deeply. "Greetings, Major General." When they shouted their greeting, their words echoed about as loudly as thunder. Seeing 10,000 people lined up in front of him caused Bai Xiaochun to sigh inwardly and think back to how he had come to Great Wall City all by himself, and had climbed from the rank of lieutenant to captain, and then colonel. Now, here he was at the very pinnacle, a major general. The mere thought of how much work he had put into becoming a major general left him sighing ceaselessly. Finally, he waved his hand and said, "Very well, let's go for a bit of a walk." With that, his 1,000-man regiment from before stepped forward and fell into ranks around him to act as his personal guard. At the same time, the 10 colonels under his command also stepped forward. As they flew up into the air, the rest of the corps spread out to clear a path and make sure no one got too close. Bai Xiaochun felt extremely excited to be so awe-inspiring, and was very pleased that all of his hard work had paid off. He even made sure to proceed along slowly so everyone could look at him, and also took time to chat with his colonels. The cautious way they carried out conversation with him left him very pleased. Quite a few people noticed that he was parading through the city. Some time back, he had done the same thing as a colonel, but this time, he was a major general. The news that Bai Xiaochun had been commissioned as the major general of the Third Corps of the Skin Flayers was big news in the wildlands. Intelligence regarding him was actually very important in general there. Whether it was his exploding pill furnaces or his soul convergence pills, everything he did seemed to hurt them. When the news reached Mistress Red Dust in her command tent, she looked at the intelligence report before crushing the jade slip. "So that's what happened the other day," she said. Bai Xiaochun turned in souls to get battle credit, which then earned him a promotion to Major General. Kneeling in front of her was a necromancer in a gray robe, whose cultivation base fluctuations placed him in the nascent soul level. "According to the information from our spies," he said, "that's exactly what happened." More specifically, Bai Xiaochun handed in more than 1 billion souls. Even the necromancer almost couldn't believe the number he had just spoken out loud. 1 billion. Mistress Red Dust murmured, her eyes flickering with cold light. After a moment, she waved her hand. "Send down orders to put Bai Xiaochun in 5th place on the execution list. Increase the bounty on his head to 2 diva beast souls." "Yes, ma'am," the necromancer said with a somber nod of his head. With that, he left. Before long, word spread to Great Wall City that Bai Xiaochun was now in 5th place on the Wildlands execution list, and that the reward for killing him had increased to 2 diva beast souls. When Bai Xiaochun heard the news, he was quite shocked. How ruthless of them, he thought. He almost couldn't believe that the Wildlands hated him so much that they were willing to pay 2 diva beast souls to see him dead. If things keep going on like this, Bai Xiaochun thought, I wonder if they'll increase the reward to an actual diva soul one day? After thinking about the frightening implications for a moment, he buried such thoughts and then decided that he would never again take a single step outside the Great Wall on his own. HMMMPH. If I do have to go out, I'll take my entire 10,000-man corps with me. I refuse to believe that anyone in the wildlands can kill me with them around. Of course, there might be some spies among the cultivators here, but I'm in the middle of Great Wall City after all. Such reasoning left him feeling a bit comforted, but not completely. Wait a second, my cultivation base is still too low. I'm only in the great circle of the gold core stage. If I want to make a breakthrough, I'll at least need a full set of diva beast souls. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth. Although he still had a lot of battle credit, he definitely didn't have enough to trade for a diva beast soul. Furthermore, if he wanted to trade in one of his diva souls, he would have to wait until he was back in the sect. To pull a diva soul out by the Great Wall would be too risky. Maybe I can't increase my cultivation base, but I can definitely make some progress with my undying live forever technique. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun took out a jade slip, filled out a list of certain items he needed, and passed it off to Zhao Long to take care of. Now that Bai Xiaochun was a major general, he had a lot of special privileges. Not only could he post simple missions without needing any authorization, but he could also make requests for supplies. Of course, considering how much battle credit he had, he didn't want to take advantage of his position, so he also gave Zhao Long plenty of resources to purchase the necessary items. Before long, Zhao Long returned with the precious materials he had requested. Then, Bai Xiaochun announced that he would be going into secluded meditation, whereupon he began to cultivate his undying live forever technique. This time I can't hold anything back. I have to get my undying live forever technique to the great circle of the 3rd level. Taking a deep breath, he pulled out an earth spirit tuber and popped it into his mouth. As the life force within the tuber began to course through him, he closed his eyes and began to work with his undying live forever technique. Almost immediately, that life force transformed into streams of heat that flowed toward his head, where they began to take the shape of undying tendons. His work required focus and concentration, and couldn't be rushed. Thankfully, he had so much battle credit that it was easy to get the precious materials he required. Time passed. Before long, a year had gone by. That year was mostly spent in quiet cultivation. Bai Xiaochun rarely appeared out in the open, and therefore, the talk about the events leading up to his promotion gradually began to die down. Another half a year went by, and the talk died down even more. One day when Bai Xiaochun was sitting there cross-legged in his secluded meditation facilities, his eyes snapped open, and it almost looked like lightning was crackling within them. Settling his breathing, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture and then waved his hands out in front of him. Instantly, all of the precious materials arrayed in front of him shattered into dust. Then, the dust clumped together and flew into his mouth, sucked away in an instant. Boundless life force erupted out inside of him, which Bai Xiaochun immediately sent flowing toward his head. By this point, the undying tendons in his head were more than 90% complete, with only a tiny fraction remaining incomplete. It was almost like a huge door that needed to be slammed at with great force before it could open. As Bai Xiaochun was completely focused on achieving a major breakthrough with the 3rd level of the undying live forever technique, it was high noon outside, and the sun was shining down hot and bright onto the lands outside the Great Wall. Some distance away, the same black pillar of light could still be seen shining up into the sky. It was something the cultivators of the 5 legions had grown used to in the more than 1 year since it had appeared. Although many people had been dispatched to gather information about it, nothing conclusive had ever been determined. The only thing that was clear was that the necropolis was huge, and filled with the skeletons of many shocking beasts. Other than that, it appeared to be empty. However, neither the wildlands nor the Great Wall forces were willing to give up on trying to uncover its secrets. They were constantly trying to uncover new information. It was because of that the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect issued orders that all of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity superstars were required to investigate the location at least once. Therefore, all of the various chosen who had scattered in different directions over the years were forced at some point to head in the direction of Great Wall City. During the year and a half that Bai Xiaochun was in secluded meditation, quite a few people passed through Great Wall City on their way outside to investigate the necropolis. When it came to Bai Xiaochun, only the Hall of Steel Veins could give him orders, and naturally, they wouldn't order him to do something like that. Currently, there was a group of 3 chosen outside of the Great Wall, all of them disguised as soul cultivators. One was a beautiful woman, one was a gaunt middle-aged fellow in mid-core formation, and the third was a strapping young man with a murderous aura so strong it made him seem completely unapproachable. At the same time, though, there was something about him that made people trust him and not hesitate to follow his orders. His eyes were profoundly cold, making him look like a sheathed sword just waiting to strike. Clearly, he was the type of person who no one would be willing to provoke casually. Quite a few vicious-looking scars could be seen on him, but instead of diminishing his appearance, they actually served to make him even more attractive to female cultivators. If Bai Xiaochun were here, he would recognize this young man in an instant. He was none other than Song Ke. As soon as the group of three caught sight of the Great Wall, the beautiful young woman sighed and said, "Finally back." The middle-aged cultivator was clearly moved as well. Who would have thought that our journey would take 3 years? Without you, Brother Song, I'm afraid we would have ended up dead and buried in the wildlands. He would never forget the events which had unfolded over the past 3 years. At the outset, their group had numbered more than 10. However, on their very first mission they ended up stranded in a very dangerous location, unable to send messages requesting backup, and also cut off from news about what was happening on the outside. They had been trapped in that danger zone together with a large group of savages and soul cultivators. Despite the fact that the two groups were from the Wildlands and the Great Wall respectively, no major conflicts had broken out at first. However, as time progressed, the situation devolved into open fighting. It was Song Ke who had combined force and charm to bring the situation under control. By winning over the savages and the soul cultivators, he had managed to direct the efforts of the entire group into finding a way out of the trap. As for his two companions, they felt like they had survived a huge catastrophe, and they couldn't help but feel respect and gratitude toward Song Ke for how he had helped them. The young woman looked over enviously at him and said, "That's right, big bro Song. With everything you've accomplished, you'll definitely be able to achieve a meteoric rise. I wouldn't be surprised if you get into the top 10 of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity Superstars. In fact, considering your current battle prowess, you probably already qualify to tangle with the current top 10. Song Ke smiled faintly and didn't bother to act modestly. Even he was convinced that his 3 bitter years in the wildlands had turned him into a completely different person. He had achieved a cultivation-based breakthrough, and was currently in late core formation. Furthermore, thanks to certain secret magics of the Bloodstream division, he now possessed enough battle prowess that he had been able to kill a soul cultivator in the Great Circle of core formation. Such an accomplishment was definitely worthy of pride. He could well imagine what it would be like to get inside the Great Wall, and go back to World City. At that point, he would surely be one of the best among the chosen. Even if some of the others stumbled into good fortune, none of them could compare to me. Another source of pride was the fact that during the 3 years in which he had been in the wildlands, he hadn't accomplished only 3 missions but rather 7. All of them had been completed within the danger zone that he had ended up trapped in. Furthermore, because he had personally united the cultivators and the wildlanders, he had also made valuable connections with people in the wildlands. Although he hadn't acquired a Diva Beast soul, he had managed to get more than 300 nascent soul-level souls, each and every one of which could be sold for a significant profit. Most importantly of all, he had uncovered some clues as to the location of a Diva Beast soul. Not even his 2 companions were aware of that, only him. His current plan was to finish out his first 5 years of the trial finishing missions, improving his cultivation base, and exploring the wildlands. The final 5 years would be devoted to reaching the Great Circle of Core Formation, and searching for a Diva Beast soul. Considering my accomplishments in battle and the missions I've completed, it would be easier to find a phoenix feather or a Qilin horn than to find someone who has surpassed me. HMMMPH. From what I heard a few years ago, Bai Xiaochun got stuck in Great Wall City doing work as an apothecary. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.